Nobody.
The topic is African Americans and reparations, and we're talking to Dr. Al-Hadid. And Dr. Al-Hadid, let me apologize for so abruptly ending the second segment, but it always happens with you that you're giving us so much information that we want to try to get as much of it as we possibly can. But let's devote this last segment to talk about reparations, but some of the possibilities that you see of how, if this is to happen, how African Americans can be compensated for in terms of reparations.
Yes. Since we started with history, let's end this section also with history, and we have to go back to the original reparation that was proffered by the government, which was 40 acres and a mule, which had passed the Congress as well as the the Senate as well as the House of Representatives, and then was vetoed by the president at that time. So there was a goodwill or an intent there to grant that reparation, but it was sort of, taken out of the picture due to the veto. Now, when we come to how would reparations be paid today, there are a number of suggestions. One, of course, would be in some denomination of money. Then you would have to decide whether you're going to give it to families or individuals. Another would be in terms of job training. Another approach would be, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of fair housing and providing, housing that is decent for African Americans. And when you look at the fact that many of our people are on welfare, and many of them are not the beneficiaries of affirmative action, maybe those gaps can be closed in terms of getting people up and running. Now, in terms of how I look at the compensation, I think that education is the key. And where I think we should start with that would be, first of all, the neighborhood schools across the country, and secondly, the historically black colleges across the country. And now you have historically black colleges in Chicago and Los Angeles, when they used to be from Washington, D.C. to Texas, mainly a southern phenomenon. So we start with those colleges and make them competitive. If they are state schools, they should be properties of the people. All of these schools should be owned and controlled by African Americans. The curriculum should be changed, and it should be centered in the culture and the history of African Americans. So they should be deliberately set up in order to bring African Americans into the knowledge of the historical culture and the heritage, and also to help them clearly define who they are as an ethnic group, and to move the conversation away from race, but culture and ethnicity. And then another approach to that curriculum should be developing a strategy of economic self-determination. Because the way the capitalist system is organized today, it is fresh out of welfare, and it's fresh out of affirmative action, even though we know the system itself is responsible for creating and manufacturing unemployment and poverty, which are the sources of welfare, and which is the sources of people having a need for affirmative action. So I think if we create educational institutions, and we have 117 colleges, if those were properly structured in terms of the curriculum, with the view in mind of making African Americans self-sufficient, self-reliant, then that would be the key, and make us competitive in a capitalist economic system. The capitalist economic system is the only economic system on the whole planet. So we need to be taught how to be major players in the capitalist economic system, not so that we'll be vulturistic and exploitive the way the European capitalists are, but at least so that we can get in the marketplace, find our way in that marketplace, get rid of the poverty and the unemployment in our community, and create a situation where the average African American is at least middle class according to American standards.
You know, Dr. Al-Hadid, I'm reminded of a show that we did quite recently dealing with the African world from a global dimension, and we had an opportunity to talk to a lady from New York named Sister Latrella Thornton.
Yes.
And her point of view was that the only way that you can bring about some of the things that you're talking about is to deal with the administration of many of these institutions, which is to say that it's one thing to think in terms of centering these historically black institutions up on the African culture and et cetera, but the most important thing is to think about a method whereby you might be able to deal with those who are in charge of these institutions, to have them to see this point of view. Now, how would you address that?
Well, the first thing I would do, I would require every administrator to read Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro. That's number one. After they finish reading that book, I require them to read a book, interesting enough, written by a white woman, entitled Uncle Tom's Campus, so that they can clearly see that their interest should be with the community and not with the Board of Trustees if they're in the private sector, or with the Board of Regents if they're in the public sector. That they should work in the interest of the people, their people, and be very clear on who their people are, as opposed to looking at a $100,000 salary or $80,000 salary and trying to take care of their own family situation. So first of all, they would have to completely change their way of thinking. Now there is one college president that I admire a lot, and I had an opportunity to work under him, with him rather, from 1975 to 1985, and that's Dr. Frederick Humphreys. I think he's the only African-American college president that I've seen who stands up as a man and who also advocates a philosophy that is progressive and determining. I haven't seen a lot of them like him. He's very radical, very militant, very outspoken. As a matter of fact, when Frederick Humphreys was at Tennessee State, I think, and you worked with him directly, I mean, I think he was probably the most radical person on campus. And that's totally out of character for the president of a historically black college. But we need every one of them to be like that. All 117 should be like Fred Humphreys, and I think we can make some movement.
And of course, this whole issue of reparation, this is an issue. I think one time you remarked that while the separation of the races, Du Bois's idea of the color line being the important thing in the 20th century, you made the statement that the most important issue in the 21st century would be reparations. Do you still believe that?
I still believe that. I still believe that that's the most important issue for us in this part of the 21st century. But also, I think in that same program, I said that the issue that we're facing is the digital divide, which makes it even more imperative that we get up to speed in terms of computer technology. And that's another area, I think, that reparations can be appropriated. Maybe Bill Gates might want to get involved in bringing the African American community above the digital divide and making the entire community literate in terms of computer technology and all the other technologies that are spin-offs from the information industry.
Well, as a sociologist, would you say that all of these things that might benefit the African American population would also be beneficial to the nation as a whole over the last couple of minutes? Speak to that.
Absolutely, because if you have crime and unemployment and poverty in the African American community, quite naturally that is going to breed crime and drug dealers and numbers runners. So once you get that out of the communities will be safe, and then even white people will feel safe walking in North Nashville or other African American communities across the country, because they know the people don't have to steal, they don't have to rob, they don't have to be hostile, because they have all the material things that they see white people have here in this country. So absolutely, I mean, that would be the most peaceful environment I can think of.
And so this is not really not a radical idea in terms, this is just an idea of paying people for the work that they've done without receiving pay, and somehow trying to meet the pain and suffering that occurred over those centuries, those 3 centuries that African Americans, for example, in this country, were enslaved. Is that what we're saying? Is that?
You know, I think it's time to take the blindfold off Lady Justice, because she's been peeping from underneath all along, you see. So let's just bring it out so that she can be fair and balance those scales. I mean, she's been just when it's come to white Americans, but most unjust when it comes to the black, brown, red, and yellow people inside of the belly of America.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Al-Hadid, let me thank you, excuse me, over the last 30 seconds that we have for that excellent information about reparation. Each time that you come to us, you bring us such excellent information, and we certainly appreciate this whole idea. And I certainly appreciate the fact that we're able to elevate it into a position where it is understandable that when people talk about being in favor of reparation, they're essentially talking about being in favor of justice. Is
Absolutely,
that what you're saying?
there's no doubt
Okay.
in it. Economic justice.
Economic justice. And I certainly appreciate that point of view. And of course, we'll calling into the show for today, and let us encourage our audience to, again, tune in next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.